Today's show is sponsored by CloudZero. For software-driven companies focused on growing margins, CloudZero is the only cloud cost intelligence platform that puts engineering in control by connecting technical decisions to business results. By analyzing cloud services like AWS and Snowflake, CloudZero provides real-time cost insights that help you maximize margins. Engineering teams can answer critical questions like, who are my most expensive customers? How much does this specific feature cost our business? What's the cost impact of re-architecting this application? With cost anomaly alerts via Slack, product-specific data views, and granular engineering context that makes it easy to investigate any cost, CloudZero is your complete cloud cost intelligence platform, connecting the dots between high-level trends and individual line items. Join companies like Drift, Rapid7, and SeatGeek by visiting cloudzero.com/cloudcast to get started today. That's cloudzero.com/cloudcast.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody is doing well as we continue to move into September of 2022. Kind of the fall is here, starting to see some leaves change colors, fall off the trees, and the craziness and chaos of college football season is well underway and under swing and under chaos, and lots of upsets here in the United States. But I hope everybody's doing well. Today I want to talk a little bit about as we do a Sunday Perspective show, I want to kind of get back to the form that we did earlier in the year and last year that people liked quite a bit, which was sort of, we'd find the intersection of a couple of interesting articles from the week or from the last couple of weeks and kind of draw some lines between them, right? Pull some threads between them. And the ones this week that were interesting to me were really around kind of the rise and fall, or really the fall of a number of companies and individuals that, were big heroes, big superstars, big rock stars over the last few years, last decade plus. People that wrote books about their success, and others wrote about their success, and people emulated them, and companies emulated them, and we're starting to see. What often happens in our industry is, we do a lot of hero worshiping, and then, when things go bad, we write very, very detailed essays about why they failed, and then hopefully try and learn some things from it. So I thought I would take a couple of interesting stories that I found out there this week and kind of weave some threads between those things, but really kind of get into kind of the stage that we're going to probably run into here in a little bit within our industry, where some of the hero worshiping that we've done over the last 5, 6, 7 years, starts to crumble a little bit. It's very, very difficult to be a disruptor. We tend to celebrate the ones who figure out some way to disrupt the bigger ones, the sort of classic David versus Goliath story. But at some point, a lot of times those stories fail, even for the ones who, go from David to Goliath and become the biggest one. Oftentimes they start to fail when other Goliaths or even other Davids come along. So we're going to dig into that after the break. Buffering, how annoying. Did you know that 17 out of 20 people stop watching a video because of stalling and rebuffering? Don't let your users click away to a competitor's site. If your business lies in online media, rely on CDN77 to deliver a seamless online experience to your audience. CDN77 is one of the leading global providers of content delivery network services. They power the world's most popular websites and apps, such as Udemy, ESL Gaming, live sports TV, and social media platforms. Aside from their massive and redundant global network, you're going to love their no BS attitude and skilled team of engineers ready to help 24/7. No chatbots, no tickets bouncing around unresolved for days, just people who know your use case and can immediately help you pinpoint and fix the problems. Don't wait until your users run out of patience. Go to cdn77.com/cloudcast and ask for a free trial with no duration or traffic limits. That's cdn77.com/cloudcast. And we're back. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, we're going to dig a little bit into the beginning of some stories that we're seeing, as the economy shifts and more importantly, just kind of like we come out of the pandemic, some sort of the craziness that happened in the pandemic, but even just things that happened over the last 5, 6 years in terms of raising the visibility of certain individuals, certain companies, certain segments of the industry. And we're now seeing some changes in those. We're seeing some falls from historic highs. We're seeing some culture stories starting to fall apart when the economics of what built them start to change and so forth. So when things are good, when interest rates are low, when stock prices are up, VC money is flowing. We see a lot of stories written about disruptors, and we see a lot of hero worshiping and a lot of excitement around these great minds that figured out how to do stuff. And then when those things change, when the economy changes, interest rates go up, your stock price is not as appealing as a way of offsetting salary or creating great wealth for your investors or for your workers, or being able to create really interesting cultures in which you can take infinite amounts of risk without really worrying about how you went and built that risk. We start to see stories written about kind of how those things crumble down. And what I kind of wanted to do was not sort of live on either side of that. I know we spent a lot of time in the show kind of highlighting new technologies and trying to be fairly good at picking some of the areas to talk about that we think probably will be successful. We've got a decent track record of that, not a perfect track record as anybody in technology. You're trying to predict the future a little bit. But I think especially now, and again, I feel like the last bunch of Sunday Perspective shows are really kind of geared at those folks who haven't lived through a couple of these sort of up cycles and down cycles in technology. So if you've lived through them a few times, sometimes you've seen the writing on the wall. Hopefully you've, if you have lived through them, you start to see patterns develop. But if you're new to this and you've only, really been in the tech industry for say the last 10 years or so, seeing the first sort of downturn like we're seeing now, and this downturn isn't nearly like the last couple. I always go back to like 01 and 08, and obviously the pandemic had all sorts of crazy things, but tech didn't necessarily fall right away with the pandemic. It's tended to sort of normalize itself back here post-pandemic. But I think it's really important as you're looking at things and you're studying the industry, and it is important to study the industry. It's important to match the era of disruption that we're in with the economic era that we're in. And we've talked about this a bunch of times in the show, but like, a lot of times with disruption, what happens is it really begins to happen somewhat out of necessity. People are looking for a better mousetrap, if you will. But a lot of times it happens when the economy has gone through some tough times, and the economic environment, lower interest rates, cheaper availability of money, more money available in the system, such that ideas that may sound a little bit crazy on the surface or really crazy on the surface, people are okay with investing in. People are okay with taking a chance on it because, the amount of risk it seems like they're taking don't seem that big, right? Or, sometimes we just go through some technological changes, some beginning of an era, end of an era type of thing. So I think it's really important as we look at disruption, as we look at sort of the trends in technology, to sort of keep in mind, like, where are we kind of on the economic ends of things, right? And what we tend to see is the big disruption again when the economy is not necessarily when it's good, but when interest rates are low, so the availability of money is there. What feels like the risk of failure is not necessarily as high, and we're not necessarily in that era again now, right? Like, interest rates are up a little bit. Trust me, they're not up significantly. When I go back to various stages, let's say your interest rates or your housing rates, for example, are like 5% or 6%. Like, it's not unusual to talk to people who 10, 15 years ago, they were 15%, 12%, 11%, right? So, we're in sort of an in-between time right now. But the second thing is we're going to start to see a lot of stories be written about, and we've seen them somewhat, right? But like we saw, massive growth, for example, say during the pandemic of tech companies, right? So we saw companies like Zoom, had ridiculous valuations. We saw Amazon going through the roof because everybody was buying stuff from home. We saw Netflix grow like crazy because everybody was watching Tiger King or, whatever was, or they were watching Ozark or, they grew like crazy. And we're seeing a lot of those things come back to earth. In some cases, they're kind of coming back to some sort of, sort of normalized 2019 state like Amazon and so forth. Others, like a Netflix or whatever, we're starting to see, them, the cracks in the armor of the things that help them build their growth, right? It's important to sort of be able to kind of look through these things and figure out, like, did they do a lot of things to create growth which weren't sustainable, right? In the case of like somebody like Netflix, and there's a really good article that I'll post in the show notes that talks about the things that Netflix was doing. And I know, if we look back at where Netflix was doing, right, on one hand, they're growing like crazy. They were essentially creating what the streaming market looked like, and they were sort of the lighthouse of what things look like. But then they started doing some crazy things, right? They were paying exorbitant amounts of money for new shows, right? They were buying up every new idea, whether it was a good, bad, or indifferent idea, in order to always have new stuff, right? They were going to be the thing that had new, because again, they decided that they didn't want to be the carrier of other people's content. And in some cases, other people that had content, say like a Disney or Friends or whatever it was pulling those things off of it because they wanted to start their own thing. So they did some crazy things to get there. They had a culture in which they talked about, hey, we pay the highest in the industry, and that's great. A lot of companies have gone through that, where they're like, look, what I'm trying to do is really challenging, and I want to have the best people, and I don't have time for learning curves, and I don't have time for internal mentoring and all those sort of things. But at some point, whether you're Netflix or some other company, it's really hard to sustain those things. And so I think, we're into an era where we're going to see a lot of stories of the companies who, wrote culture manifestos. And there are dozens of them out there. Netflix is sort of the most well-known, but there's plenty of companies where, others would sort of look at that and go, boy, we would love to emulate what they do, but we just can't do that. Like, we either can't recruit that kind of talent, or we can't pay for that kind of talent, or, we can't have these sort of completely decentralized decision-making models in which there's no accountability and other types of things. And again, I'm not pointing fingers at NetApp, but like, we've seen a lot of these sort of cultures float around in which, if you looked at it and you just applied sort of normal business school logic, or just normal logic, sort of your basic accounting and P&L kind of things, you went, how in the world is that going to work? How is that going to sustain itself? And we've seen these things happen over and over again. I've seen them, dozens of times in my career. But we're going to see a lot of stories written about that, about these companies who were high flyers, who were disruptors. We've already seen this with Uber and WeWork and Netflix and lots of others, where their ability to have grown was partially on a really new, novel idea and a disruptive idea. But the economics never made any sense, and the economics are now sort of catching up to them, right? We're going to see a lot of fraud get called out, and you're going to learn a lot about how to identify fraud, the red flags around fraud, about what's fraud versus what's just sort of kind of morally questionable ways of doing business and so forth. And we're going to see a lot of stories written about culture and how companies are adapting to culture, right? We've seen, unfortunately, a lot of layoffs in our industry, not nearly as much as we've seen in other big dips, but we've seen some, unfortunate types of things. And hopefully, as we mentioned before, all of you are trying to help and reach out to people in your industry and trying to help where you can, or make connections where you can. But we're going to see a lot less stories about kind of the greatness of culture. And it doesn't mean that company culture isn't important, but we're going to see a lot more stories in which kind of what sometimes would feel like the frivolity of certain cultures is going to get trumped by the profitability of certain cultures, right? The ability to sustain and to grow, not, out of control, but to grow in ways that are profitable and so forth. So we're going to see a lot of our articles and stories written about those sort of things. The next thing we're going to see is a lot of ecosystems of the largest companies start to wonder if they're still making the right choices about which ecosystems they're aligned to, right? And we've seen this with some of the cloud companies. We've seen this with, different segments of the industry in which, what happens when things are great is everybody wants to partner. There seems like enough pie for everybody. The pies get bigger and so forth. But when things get a little bit slower, or the economics of things change, what tends to happen is the largest incumbents basically kind of go, how can I eat my ecosystem? How can I add more capabilities such that people have less choices they have to make? So the companies that they work with, their customers they work with, can come to them as sort of one-stop shop for a lot of things. And so you'll see some real big changes in ecosystems in which companies who, decide, hey, how all in do we want to be with a certain, largest player in the industry? And again, I'm not calling out anyone in particular. We're going to see this kind of across a lot of things, but companies start to wonder, should I diversify what ecosystem I'm in? Should we, are we going to get eaten by the largest member of our ecosystem? Do we need to defend ourselves against that? Do we need to, start getting into other segments of markets that are going to make things more defensible? So we're going to see some of that as well. And the last thing that we see a lot of when this thing happens is, when times are really good and there's low interest rates and lots of VC money flowing into things, and we see a lot of technologies come out. The CNCF is a perfect example of that, and I'm not trying to call out the CNCF, but I mean, for example, if you look at the CNCF landscape and you think about, well, the CNCF started with just Kubernetes, and you go look at the landscape of the CNCF today, or you just look at all the sandbox innovation projects, like there's a lot of really interesting stuff in there. But at the same time, there's a lot of stuff in there. And I think what we're going to, and when every one of those companies is getting, or every one of those projects and the lead company for that is getting, $100 million in funding and $1 billion valuation or a $5 billion valuation or whatever, you sort of go, how is that going to sustain itself? And again, not calling out any one industry, one technology, one company, one segment of it. But it is hard, when there's not going to be 7 companies that are all great at, container security, for example. They're not all going to have $5 billion valuations, and that's just a hypothetical. Don't read anything into that. So we're going to see a lot more, kind of good technologies. Lots of technologies happen when times are good. What quote unquote good meaning like sort of free flowing money in our industry. When things get a little bit tighter and the valuations get a little bit tighter and the amount of money that flows in the system gets tighter, there will still be lots of good technologies. Our industry never struggles with people that are innovative and are willing to come up with new ideas and are able to come up with new ideas and solve new problems. But they're also not necessarily they're going to have to build them as more sustainable businesses. And that's just what happens when we have these sort of downturns is, you find out people who not only can build interesting technologies, but build sustainable businesses and businesses that might have to be around for 5 years or 7 years before some sort of exit happens for them, whether that's an IPO or they get sold or they start getting big enough to acquire companies or whatever it is. So, I highlight a lot of these things just because, you're going to start seeing more and more of these kind of stories or people dig into, we love winners, but the media also loves losers, right? And the stuff in between doesn't always get as much coverage, but winners and losers tend to. So we like watching the rocket ships go up, and unfortunately, we like watching sometimes things crash as well. And I think you're going to start to see more and more of these things kind of get uncovered. And again, don't take this as a terrible thing. It's the natural sort of ebb and flow of technology. It's the natural ebb and flow of our industry. And it's sort of good to watch because it teaches you how to look for red flags. It teaches you how to look for the things that are really good and pragmatic and stable and buildable and which things are really sort of innovative new ideas, right? Like they change the economics of something, or they really change the power dynamics of what's going on, or they really 10x some area of technology versus the ones that are just sort of shiny and new and not really differentiated and things along those lines. So anyways, definitely an area where we're kind of moving into. I'm calling this, when the smart guys get it wrong, we have a tendency to, like I said, sort of hero worship and make a lot of people out to be the smartest guy in the room. Sometimes they are, but in a lot of cases, they are maybe because of the dynamics of the era that they're in, the year that they're in, the timing that they're in. So it's always a good opportunity to sort of, step back, learn a little bit, not only about the technology, but also almost as importantly, and maybe more importantly, kind of the economic times that we're in and, how it's possible to monetize technology, to grow, create companies, to figure out which companies might be around. Are they built on good, solid foundation, or are they built on sort of sand and shifting stones and stuff like that? So anyways, lots going on in our industry, an interesting time. Really excited about the fall coming up and all the trade shows coming up, and hopefully maybe seeing some people in person. I know myself, I'll be at KubeCon and AWS reInvent. I think Aaron's going to be at both those as well. So maybe we'll try and do some live in-person get-togethers for Cloudcast people if people are interested in that. So if you're going to KubeCon, I know Aaron and I will both be there in Detroit. Hit us up, let us know if you're going. maybe we'll try and find some place to have some drinks or get together on the show floor or something along those lines. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope your college football team is winning or not embarrassing themselves. And with that, I'll talk to you all next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.